A single smile from a stranger would awaken a father's hope, change a child's world, and turn a life of struggle into a miracle no amount of money could buy. The city always looked brighter from the tall glass windows of his mansion, but for him the lights meant nothing. People called him the Golden Man, the one who had everything a person could dream of. His name was printed in newspapers, his photo flashed on television, and whenever he stepped out, expensive cars, bodyguards, and luxury followed him. Yet inside his heart there was a silence that no sound could break. He had the money, the power, the respect of the world, but when he looked at his son, he felt the deepest ache a father could ever feel. His son, barely 8 years old, was born with a condition that kept him from running around like other children. The boy could not walk without support, his body tired quickly, and most of the time he remained in his wheelchair. Doctors had been there since the very first day. The father had flown in the best specialists from different countries, brought in machines, therapies, even experimental treatments. Money was never the issue. But what hurt the most was not his son's condition itself. It was the emptiness on the boy's face. He never smiled. His eyes were calm, yes, but far away, like he lived in another world where no one could reach him. Every morning the father walked into his son's room hoping for a change. He would greet him, touch his hair, and say, "Good morning, champ." But the boy would only blink or look away, sometimes humming softly to himself. The father would stand there for minutes, waiting, almost begging for a smile, but none came. At night, when he sat alone in his huge study with bookshelves and leather chairs, he asked himself the same question again and again: why can't I make my son happy? He remembered the first time he held the baby in his arms. His wife had already passed away by then, leaving him to raise the child alone. He had promised that day he would give the boy everything, every comfort, every opportunity, every reason to laugh. And yet, years had gone by, and not once had he seen a spark of joy on his little boy's lips. It tore him apart in ways no one could see. Business meetings, interviews, award ceremonies, he wore a strong face everywhere. People admired him as a man who never broke. But behind those walls, when the lights of the city faded into the night, he sat by his son's bedside and felt like the weakest man alive. There were moments when he tried everything he could think of. He bought toys, the rarest ones children all over the world would dream of. The boy would look at them for a while and then turn his face away. He built a playroom full of colors, lights, and sounds, but his son never wanted to stay there. He hired clowns, magicians, musicians, all kinds of entertainers who came, performed, and left, but not a single smile appeared. He even tried to make silly faces himself one evening, something completely unlike his proud, serious nature. But the boy only looked down. That night, the father went to bed with tears he did not allow anyone to see. What hurt him even more was when he saw other children laughing. On rare occasions, when he had to attend public charity events, he would see kids running around, chasing balloons, eating ice cream, their laughter filling the air. Parents would hold their hands, smile with them, and he would stand there quietly wishing his son could feel that same lightness. Instead, his boy stayed close to him, eyes quiet, never joining in. Every giggle from another child felt like a knife reminding him of what his son could not do. The father began to feel a strange fear. What if his son never smiled? What if he grew up without ever knowing joy? What if, despite all the wealth in the world, he remained a prisoner of silence? This thought haunted him every day, pushing him deeper into loneliness. No one around him could understand it. His employees only saw the tough businessman. The world only saw the billionaire. But inside, he was a father begging for a small miracle, the curve of a smile on his son's face. One evening, after a long business trip, he came home tired but restless. The house was quiet as always. The boy was sitting in the garden in his wheelchair, looking at the fountain. The father sat beside him, put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said softly, "I wish I knew how to make you happy." The boy didn't answer, didn't even turn his face, just kept staring at the water. A tear rolled down the father's cheek, one he quickly wiped away before anyone could see. That was the moment he realized something that shook him. Maybe money really couldn't buy everything. His friends often said he was lucky. They envied his wealth, his influence, his lifestyle. But what did they know about luck? To him, luck would have been seeing his son's lips curve into a smile just once. Luck would have been hearing laughter in his own home instead of silence. Luck would have been knowing that his child felt joy even for a second. The truth was, he felt powerless. And for a man who controlled empires, who made decisions that moved markets, that feeling was unbearable. At work, he could solve problems, fix failures, and make things happen with a phone call. But here, in front of his little boy, he was helpless. Every night he prayed quietly, not to any god in particular, but to the universe itself. Give him happiness, take everything else from me if you want, but just give him a reason to smile. What he didn't know was that this prayer, this silent cry from a father's heart, was about to be answered in the most unexpected way, not by doctors or machines, not by specialists or therapy, but by a stranger he hadn't even met yet. The day had been long, filled with endless meetings, phone calls, and documents that needed his signature. Yet, when evening came, the billionaire father did not feel like going back to his empty, silent dining hall where servants would quietly place food on golden plates. That silence always reminded him of what he was missing. A sound that no amount of wealth could buy, the laughter of his little boy. On a sudden impulse, he decided to take his son out. It was not planned, not scheduled, just a quiet thought that maybe a change of place would help. He called for the car, and within minutes the two of them were seated inside the black luxury vehicle. The city outside was alive with neon lights, crowds rushing past each other, the smell of food floating through the air from small street stalls. The father looked at his son beside him, sitting still in his wheelchair, his face as calm and distant as always. The boy's hands rested in his lap, fingers twitching slightly, his gaze fixed on the passing lights but not really seeing them. "Where should we go tonight?" the father asked gently, though he knew there would be no answer. The boy remained silent, as he often did. The father sighed but decided on a small diner he had noticed many times while driving through the city. It was nothing like the grand restaurants he usually went to. This place was modest, glowing with a warm yellow light, with a small signboard that had faded letters. For some reason, he felt drawn to it. When the car stopped in front of the diner, people glanced in surprise at the expensive vehicle, whispering and pointing. But the father ignored them, stepping out and carefully lifting his son into his arms before placing him back in the wheelchair. Together they entered the diner. The atmosphere inside was completely different from the grand halls he was used to. There was laughter, clinking cups, the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread. Families sat together. Workers ate after a long shift, and the place felt alive, warm, human. They found a table near the window. The boy sat quietly, his small hands resting on the table. The father ordered something simple, though food wasn't the real reason he had come. He just wanted a change, some air outside the cold walls of his mansion. That was when she appeared, the waitress. She was young, wearing a simple uniform, her hair tied back, a smile on her face, though her eyes carried the kind of tiredness that comes from long hours of work. She walked over to their table with a notepad, but when her eyes fell on the boy, something in her expression softened. She didn't just see a customer. She saw a child. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said, kneeling slightly so she could be at the boy's eye level. Her voice was gentle, playful, not forced. She didn't look at him with pity as so many others did. Instead, she spoke to him as if he were any other child sitting in her diner. The boy blinked, staring at her with curiosity. The father watched silently, surprised. Most people either ignored his son or showed too much sympathy, speaking in hushed voices as if they were afraid. But this waitress was different. She leaned closer and said softly, "You know, I think you look like the kind of boy who loves pancakes. Am I right?" For a moment, there was silence. Then the boy's lips moved just slightly, not into words, but into a small hum, as if he were responding in his own quiet way. The waitress's smile widened. "I knew it," she said playfully. "Pancakes with extra syrup coming right up." The father's eyes widened. His son had reacted. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. He hadn't seen that spark in years. When she returned with the plate, she didn't just place it down. She cut a small piece and held the fork gently in front of the boy. "Here, taste this," she encouraged. The boy looked at her, then at the fork. Slowly he opened his mouth and she fed him the piece of pancake. A tiny sound escaped him, half a giggle, half a hum of delight. The father froze, his heart pounding. Was this real? Was his son actually enjoying something? The boy's lips curved, not fully, but enough for the father to see the beginnings of a smile. His chest tightened and he felt a sting in his eyes, the kind of tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in public for years. The waitress noticed too, but she didn't make it a big moment. She just chuckled softly. Told you these pancakes were magic. She winked at the boy who looked back at her with wide eyes, as if trying to understand the warmth she carried. For the rest of the meal, she kept returning, each time with a new trick, funny faces, little jokes, even balancing a spoon on her nose to make him laugh. The boy slowly but surely responded. A giggle slipped out. A brighter smile followed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't like other children's laughter. But for the father, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He sat there, completely still, afraid to move, afraid that if he blinked, the moment would vanish like a dream. His son's cheeks lifted, his lips curved, his eyes lit up in a way the father thought he would never see. All because of this young woman, this stranger who treated him like he was simply a child and not a burden to be pitied. The father felt something shift inside him. For years he had surrounded his son with experts, therapists, teachers, but none of them had succeeded. And here, in this small diner, a waitress who had probably never studied medicine or child psychology had achieved what millions of dollars could not. She had made his son smile. The boy even lifted his small hand, reaching toward her when she leaned close. She touched it gently without hesitation, and the father saw another miracle, the connection his son rarely made with anyone else. The meal ended, but the memory did not. The father could not take his eyes off the waitress as she moved from table to table, carrying trays, wiping counters, smiling at customers. She was ordinary in the eyes of the world, but to him she was extraordinary. She had given him a gift so rare, so precious, that he knew nothing he owned could compare. When they left the diner, the boy still had that faint smile on his lips. In the car ride home, he even hummed softly, as if replaying the moment again in his mind. The father sat beside him, holding back tears, his heart trembling with gratitude and disbelief. That night, for the first time in many years, he did not feel powerless. Something had happened, something no amount of money had been able to buy. A stranger had broken the walls of silence around his son, and though he didn't yet know her story, one thing was clear: this was not the end. This was the beginning of something that would change all their lives forever. The night after visiting the diner, the billionaire could not sleep. He lay awake in his large bedroom, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the same scene again and again. His son's smile, small, fragile, yet real, kept flashing before his eyes. It had been such a simple thing, a moment that lasted only seconds, but for him it was more valuable than all the gold and diamonds locked in his vaults. He had waited years for it, prayed silently for it, and suddenly it came from a place he least expected, from a young waitress who had no idea what she had done for him. The next morning, he walked into his son's room, almost holding his breath. Would the boy be different? Would he still carry that light in his eyes? The boy was sitting quietly in his wheelchair, but there was something softer in his expression, a tiny hint of calm that hadn't been there before. When the father bent down and whispered, "Good morning, champ," the boy looked at him for a moment longer than usual, as though he had remembered something. That look gave the father hope. He could not let it go. All day in meetings and phone calls, his mind drifted back to the diner. Who was that waitress? Why did she connect with his son so easily when trained experts could not? What was it in her voice, her eyes, her simple jokes that reached into the boy's heart? He found himself restless, impatient, waiting for evening to arrive. That night he made a decision. He told his driver to take them back to the same diner. His son, as always, did not react, but the father sensed a faint recognition in his eyes when they reached the glowing signboard. Once inside, the boy looked around, searching in his quiet way, and when the waitress appeared, his lips moved just slightly, almost like an unspoken call. The father's chest tightened. It was true. His son remembered her. She came over, her smile just as warm as the night before. "Well, look who's back," she said brightly, kneeling again so she could speak directly to the boy. "I was hoping I'd see you again. You ready for some more pancakes?" The boy gave the faintest sound, a soft hum that only his father would recognize as agreement. The father sat there, stunned once again. His son had never shown such response to anyone else. As the evening went on, the billionaire found himself watching carefully. The waitress never forced anything. She treated his son like a child who deserved joy, not pity. She laughed with him, teased him gently, and spoke with patience. She noticed the small details, the way his fingers tapped when he was interested, the way his eyes shifted when he wanted to say yes. She spoke his language without ever being taught. The father began to study her as much as his son. Who was she? How could a young woman working in a small diner have such wisdom, such understanding? Was it natural? Was it experience? He could not understand, and the mystery pulled him in. The third night he returned again. This time he didn't care if people recognized him or whispered about why a billionaire would eat in such a humble place. All he cared about was the light he saw in his son's face when she walked over. He sat quietly, almost invisible, letting the two of them interact. His son giggled again, a soft, beautiful sound that filled the father's soul with warmth. Each giggle was like a treasure, each smile like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The father's curiosity grew into something stronger. He wanted to know more. After she left their table to serve others, he asked the manager quietly about her. The manager told him she was one of their hardest workers, always taking extra shifts, always kind to customers, never complaining. She had been working there for almost 2 years, and everyone liked her. But the manager also mentioned in a lowered voice that she had a hard life outside of work. She was supporting her younger siblings after their parents died, struggling to keep the family together. The billionaire listened silently, his heart stirring. Suddenly things made sense. Maybe that was why she understood children so well. Maybe that was why she had such patience, such warmth. She wasn't just serving food. She was carrying the weight of others on her shoulders, yet still finding the strength to smile. As he left the diner that night, the father carried more than gratitude. He carried questions, thoughts he couldn't shake. For years he had tried to buy happiness for his son, but this woman had shown him that happiness came from something far simpler: human connection, kindness, love. On the drive home, he kept looking at his son, who was still humming softly, his lips curved into a faint smile. It was as though the boy had found a friend, someone who spoke to him in a way no one else had. The father's mind raced. Should he tell her how much she had done? Should he thank her? Should he offer her something? A token of his gratitude? But then he hesitated. What if she didn't understand? What if she thought he was only trying to throw money at her? No, he would wait. He would observe. He would learn more about her. Over the next few days, he visited again and again. Each time he watched closely, not only how she treated his son, but how she treated everyone. She smiled at the tired workers who came in late at night. She encouraged the little children who spilled their drinks. She listened to old men telling stories, nodding with respect even when she was exhausted. She never rushed anyone, never lost her patience. There was a quiet beauty in her actions, a beauty that had nothing to do with wealth or glamour. The father realized something he had almost forgotten in his world of deals and profits. Kindness had power. It could heal, it could lift, it could break walls that even money could not touch. And so, as he watched his son laugh again under her care, he felt the stirrings of a decision forming deep within him. This was not just about a smile anymore. This was about something greater. This waitress had unknowingly unlocked a door in his son's heart and in his own. He could not let that go. He leaned back in his chair that evening, eyes fixed on her as she moved across the diner. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt something new: hope. Not the shallow hope of business success or public praise, but real hope. The kind that comes when a father realizes that maybe, just maybe, his son's happiness is possible, and he knew then that he could not remain only a silent watcher. He would need to step closer, to learn more, to uncover the story behind the woman who had given him back the one thing he thought he had lost forever: his child's smile. He had seen her kindness with his own eyes, but still, something inside him wanted to know more. It was not enough for him to watch her smile at his son, laugh with him, and bring out the joy no one else could reach. He wanted to understand the woman behind the uniform, the story behind those tired but bright eyes. He wanted to know why she carried so much light even when her life seemed to weigh her down. One evening, after another visit to the diner, he told his driver to wait. He asked his bodyguard to stay behind. For the first time in many years, he walked the streets without anyone shielding him. He stood at a distance and watched her when her shift ended. She removed her apron, tied her hair differently, and stepped out into the night air. But she didn't head to a place of rest. Instead, she walked quickly, almost anxiously, as though time was chasing her. He followed quietly, making sure she didn't notice. She entered a small grocery store, carefully picking only a few items: bread, milk, some fruit. She counted the coins in her hand before paying as though each coin mattered. The billionaire's chest tightened. He had spent millions in a single evening on parties, on business deals, on luxuries he barely remembered. And here she was, calculating every rupee, every dollar. When she left the store, he followed again until she reached a small, worn-down apartment building. The paint was peeling, the lights dim, the stairs old and cracked. She climbed up quickly, her steps practiced. He stopped at the corner, not wanting to intrude, but his eyes caught a glimpse of what happened when she opened the door. The sound of little voices filled the air. 2 younger children ran to her, hugging her legs tightly. A boy and a girl, no more than 10 and 12, their faces lit with relief and happiness. "You're home!" they cried as if her arrival had made their entire day. She laughed, hugging them back, her tiredness hidden behind her joy. She placed the groceries on the table, and they began to chatter about school, about their day, about silly little things that children say when they feel safe. The billionaire stood frozen in the shadows. The picture before him told him everything. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a sister, a guardian, a parent to children who should have still been cared for by their own parents. He pieced it together. Her parents must have been gone, leaving her with this heavy responsibility, forcing her to sacrifice her own life so her siblings could grow. He felt his throat tighten. All those nights when he sat in his mansion feeling lonely, thinking no one understood his pain, this young woman was carrying a weight just as heavy, maybe heavier. Yet she did not show it. She smiled, worked hard, and gave love wherever she went. For days after, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. When he looked at her in the diner, he no longer just saw a waitress. He saw the strength it took to get up every morning, to serve strangers with kindness when her own life was full of struggle. He saw the hidden battle she fought quietly without complaint. One night, while she was cleaning a table, he decided to speak. "You're very good with children," he said softly. She looked up, surprised that he had spoken to her so directly. Most customers treated her like part of the background, but his tone was different. "Thank you," she replied politely, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You made my son laugh," he continued, his voice low, almost breaking. "You don't know what that means to me." Her eyes softened. "He's a wonderful boy. He just needs someone to listen to him in his own way." He nodded slowly, his heart pounding. "How do you know that?" "Most people don't." She hesitated for a moment, then gave a small smile. "Because I have younger siblings. I've learned that sometimes kids don't speak with words. They speak with their eyes, their hands, their silence. You just have to be patient enough to hear them." Her words hit him deeply. He wanted to ask more, but just then another customer called for her and she left. He sat there in silence, his chest heavy with both pain and admiration. The following evening he found the courage to stay after his son had fallen asleep in the car. He waited until her shift ended, then approached her outside the diner. She looked startled to see him standing there. "I don't want to scare you," he said quickly. "I just wanted to thank you properly. My son, I hadn't seen him smile in years. And then you—" His voice broke and he looked down, struggling to hold himself together. She looked at him quietly for a long moment. Then she said gently, "You don't need to thank me. Sometimes all a child needs is a little warmth. I'm glad I could give him that." He almost told her then and there that he knew about her life, her siblings, her struggles. But he held back. Instead, he asked softly, "Don't you ever get tired? Working so much, caring so much?" Her eyes flickered as though he had touched a place she usually kept hidden. "Of course I get tired," she admitted. "But I don't have a choice. My brother and sister need me. I promise them that I'll never let them feel alone no matter what it takes. So I keep going." The billionaire felt something stir inside him, a mix of admiration and sadness. He realized that while he had been drowning in his own sorrow, she had been quietly fighting battles far bigger than herself. She had no luxury, no help, no fortune, yet she carried her family with love and strength. That night when he returned home, he sat by his son's bed, watching the boy sleep peacefully. He thought of the waitress's words, her quiet determination, her strength, and suddenly he saw the truth. It wasn't doctors or money or endless luxuries that his son needed. It was connection, patience, the kind of love that expected nothing in return, and he knew then that this young woman had given him more than just his son's smile. She had given him a lesson his billions had never taught him. She had reminded him of the power of human kindness. From that night on, his mind was set. He could no longer let her struggle quietly while giving so much light to others. She had changed his life in ways she didn't even realize, and now he felt an unshakable need to change hers. The question was no longer if he would help her. The question was how. The decision had been made in his heart long before his mind could put it into words. He knew he could not walk away from her story, not after what she had given him. She had awakened something in his son that no expert, no expensive treatment, no luxury had been able to touch. She had reminded him that love was not about wealth but about presence, warmth, and patience, and for that he owed her more than just thanks. He owed her a chance at the life she had quietly sacrificed. The next evening he went to the diner again, his son by his side. As always, the boy's eyes lit up the moment the waitress appeared. She laughed, kneeling to greet him, making him giggle with a silly face. The father watched silently, his heart swelling at the simple joy in his son's laughter. But tonight he was not just watching. Tonight he was preparing for a conversation that could change her life. After their meal, when the crowd in the diner had thinned, he asked her gently, "Could you spare a few minutes after your shift? There's something important I'd like to discuss." She hesitated, a flicker of worry crossing her face. Most rich men who asked for a few minutes rarely meant something pure. But when she glanced at the boy who reached his hand toward her with trust, her doubts softened. She nodded. "All right, I'll meet you outside once I'm done." He waited in the car with his son until she finally stepped out, her apron folded in her hands, her hair loose from a long day's work. The street was quiet, the air cool. She looked tired, but her eyes still carried that brightness that had drawn him in from the start. He spoke carefully, knowing she might not believe him at first. "I want to thank you again for what you've done for my son. You gave him back his smile, and you gave me back my hope. That's something I can never repay with just words." She shifted uncomfortably. "You don't owe me anything. I only did what anyone would do." "No," he said firmly, his voice low but filled with emotion. "Not anyone would. I've seen the world. I've seen how people look at my son with pity, with discomfort, sometimes even with fear. But you saw him as a child. You gave him love not because of who I am or what I have, but because of who he is. That is rare. That is priceless." She opened her mouth to reply, but he continued before she could. "I also know about your life. I know you're raising your brother and sister alone. I know how hard you work, how much you sacrifice." Her eyes widened in shock. "How do you—" "I didn't mean to intrude," he said quickly, "but I had to understand the person who could reach my son's heart. And when I learned about you, I realized something. You've been carrying the kind of weight most people would crumble under, and yet you still choose to smile, still choose kindness. That kind of strength deserves more than just survival. It deserves a future." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't need charity. I've managed this far. I'll keep managing." "It's not charity," he said softly. "It's gratitude. It's a gift for what you've given me, and it's also justice for the way life has been unfair to you. Let me help you. Let me help your siblings. Let me give you the opportunities you've been denied, so you never have to choose between working endless hours and being with the people you love." Her lips trembled. Her hands clutched tightly around her apron. For years she had dreamed of such a possibility, but reality had taught her not to believe in miracles. Yet here he was, speaking with the sincerity of a father whose life she had unknowingly touched. What are you offering?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a deep breath. "I want to fund your siblings' education. They deserve the best schools, the best chances at life. I want to make sure you never have to worry about rent, about groceries, about bills again. And if you have dreams you've buried under responsibility, I want to help you bring them to life." Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "Why me? There are so many people suffering in this world. Why would you choose me?" He looked at her, his voice breaking. "Because you gave my son something no one else could. Because you reminded me of what truly matters. Because you've lived with a strength I can only admire. And because sometimes life chooses the people who least expect it. You didn't just change his life. You changed mine too." Silence hung between them. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hide the tears that slipped out. For years she had been strong, never allowing herself to break in front of her siblings, never letting her pain show. And now, in the quiet street under the dim lights, she finally let herself cry. The boy sitting in his wheelchair nearby made a soft sound, reaching out his small hand toward her. She looked up, meeting his innocent gaze. His lips curved again into that faint but beautiful smile. The sight broke the last of her resistance. She knelt, holding his hand tightly, tears still running down her face. The billionaire watched, his own eyes wet. He stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let me turn your life around. Not because you asked, not because you need saving, but because you deserve it. Say yes, for your brother and sister, if not for yourself." Her chest rose and fell as she tried to breathe through the weight of the moment. At last she nodded slowly. It wasn't just agreement, it was surrender to a hope she had long buried. From that night, everything began to change. Her siblings were enrolled in good schools, their faces lighting up with possibilities they had never dreamed of. She was given the chance to study too, to learn, to grow, to build a future not just of survival but of dreams. The diner no longer needed her tired hands, though she visited often, remembering where her life had shifted. But more than the material changes, it was the bond that grew between her, the billionaire and his son, that mattered most. She became a constant presence in their lives, not as an employee, not as someone he had simply helped, but as part of their family. She continued to bring joy to the boy, teaching the father too how to listen, how to connect in ways he had forgotten. And every time the boy laughed, the billionaire was reminded of that night in the diner, the night when a stranger's kindness had rewritten the story of his family. He had set out to give her a better life, but in truth, she had given him something even greater, the chance to be a real father, the chance to see his son's happiness. It was a lesson neither of them would ever forget. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. And sometimes the lives of the most powerful men are changed not by wealth, not by influence, but by the simple smile of a child and the love of someone who dared to care.